Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of really important concepts in PowerBasic objects and classes.
Yeah.
We've got some questions about this from some of our newer programmers out there.
Right.
So I thought this would be a really great opportunity to just kind of like do a deep dive. And you were kind enough to send over some beginner-friendly videos.
Yes.
And so we're going to use those as our source material today.
Okay.
And just kind of really explore this idea of objects and classes.
Sounds good.
Even if you've never written a line of code, hopefully by the end of this deep dive, you'll at least have a conceptual understanding of how objects and classes work.
Yeah.
And why they're so important.
Right.
And what's fascinating to me is that PowerBasic uses objects and classes, but it does so in a way that is surprisingly efficient.
Yes. Very, very efficient.
Which is pretty cool.
PowerBasic really shines when it comes to that. It takes all the advantages of object-oriented programming, but without the bloat and the slowness that you sometimes see in other languages.
Okay, well, let's unpack that a bit.
Okay.
So first up, what is an object when we talk about programming?
It's, think of it like a container.
Okay.
It's a container that holds both data and the code that works on that data.
So it's not just like a bunch of code and a bunch of variables just floating around.
Right. It's not just a big jumble.
Everything is organized.
It's all neatly organized and packaged together.
Okay. Why is that so important?
Well, one of the big advantages is that it helps to prevent errors.
Oh, okay.
Let me give you an example. Let's say you're working with a file.
Okay.
Now, if you're not using an object, you have to be very careful to open that file, read from it, write to it,
right,
and then close it.
Yeah.
If you forget to close the file, you can cause all sorts of problems.
Oh, I've been there.
It's a very common mistake.
Yeah.
But with an object, those actions are bundled together.
Yeah.
You just tell the object, hey, I'm done with this file, close it up. And it handles all those details for you.
That's pretty cool.
It's like having a built-in safety net.
Okay, so it takes some of the thinking out of the process.
Exactly. It takes care of those tedious details so you can focus on the bigger picture.
That's great.
And here's the really cool part. Objects are reusable.
Okay.
So let's say you've created this object that knows how to work with files. You can use that same object in multiple parts of your program.
Okay.
You can even use it in completely different programs.
Wow. So you don't have to like rewrite all that code every single time.
Exactly. It's a huge time saver.
Okay. So you're saving time, you're preventing errors.
Right.
It's all starting to make sense. Sure. So we've got these objects and they're great. But now I keep hearing this word classes.
Yes.
Where do classes fit into this whole picture?
A class is like a blueprint for an object.
Okay.
So if an object is a house, the class is the architectural drawing.
Gotcha.
It defines what data the object will hold and what actions it can perform.
So like the template.
Exactly.
And then from that template, you can create many objects.
Yes, you can create multiple objects from the same class.
Okay.
Just like you can build many houses from the same blueprint.
So if the class is the blueprint,
yes,
you can create lots of objects from that.
Yes, and each object can have its own unique data.
Right. Okay, so I'm visualizing this now.
Okay.
Like I've got this blueprint, I've got this class,
Right.
and I can just stamp out as many objects as I need.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
It's all about creating reusable components.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how that would be incredibly powerful and useful.
It is. It's all about managing complexity.
Right.
Especially as programs get larger and larger.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot more to cover here.
Yes.
We've got a lot of terminology to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just scratching the surface here.
We are.
But before we move on, is there anything else that you think is really crucial for understanding this basic concept of what an object is?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that an object is a self-contained unit.
Okay.
It's like a mini program within your larger program.
Gotcha.
And it has everything it needs to perform a specific task.
All right. Well, let's take a look at some of this terminology.
Okay.
One of the terms that I've seen pop up in these videos is instance data.
Yes.
What is instance data?
So each object that you create from a class can have its own unique set of data.
Okay.
That's what we call instance data.
Okay.
It's what differentiates one object from another, even though they're based on the same class.
So using our house analogy,
Yes.
one house might be blue.
Right.
Another house might be green.
Exactly.
So that color,
Yes.
that's part of the instance data.
That's part of their instance data. It's what makes them unique.
But here's the question. If I need to change the color of my house,
Okay.
I mean, how do I do that if I can't directly access that data?
That's a great question, and that's where methods and properties come in.
Okay, so now we're getting even deeper into the terminology.
Right.
So we've got instance data.
Yes.
Now we've got these things called methods and properties.
Yes.
What are those?
A method is basically an action that the object can perform.
Okay.
So in our house example, we might have methods for painting the house,
Oh, okay.
opening the door.
So like verbs.
Exactly. They're the things the object can do.
Okay.
Now, properties are a bit different.
Okay.
Properties provide a way to access or modify the object's data.
So if I want to change the color of my house,
Yes.
I'd use a property.
You would use a property.
So it's like a window into that internal data.
Exactly.
But why do we need to go through this extra step?
It's all about protecting the integrity of the object.
Oh, okay.
We don't want just any part of the program to be able to reach in and mess with the object's data.
Gotcha.
So methods and properties provide a controlled way to interact with the object.
Like a security system for my house.
Exact. A great analogy.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about this term that I've seen, class methods? Are those just like regular methods?
Not exactly. Class methods are special.
Oh.
They're associated with the class itself.
Okay.
Rather than with individual objects.
So rather than being associated with the house,
Yes.
they're associated with the blueprint.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
They're used to perform actions that affect the entire class.
So give me an example of that.
Sure. Let's say you have a class for managing data path connections.
Okay.
A class method could be used to create a new connection to the database.
Okay.
Or to close all existing connections.
Gotcha.
These are actions that aren't specific to any particular object. They apply to the whole class.
So it's like a global action.
Yes, you could say that.
Okay. All right. So we've got instance data, we've got methods, properties, class methods. This is a lot of terminology.
It is, but it all fits together very logically.
Okay.
Once you understand the basic concepts.
Constructors and destructors. What are those all about?
A constructor is a special method that gets called automatically when you create a new object.
Okay.
It's like the setup crew getting everything ready for the object to function correctly.
So it initializes the object.
Exactly. It sets the initial values.
Sets everything up.
Make sure everything is in order.
Gotcha. And then the destructor.
The destructor is the opposite.
Okay.
It gets called when the object is no longer needed.
So it's like the cleanup crew.
Exactly. That cleans up any resources the object was using, makes sure everything is tidy before the object is removed from memory.
Very cool.
So you have this nice life cycle.
Yeah.
The constructor sets everything up.
Right.
The object does its thing, and then the destructor cleans up after it's done.
Okay. This is all starting to make sense.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
So we've got objects, we've got classes, we've got all this terminology.
Right.
And PowerBasic makes it easy to work with all of this.
It does. It provides a very streamlined and intuitive approach.
Yeah. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We understand what objects and classes are.
Yeah.
We've got the terminology down.
Right.
Now let's talk about, when would we actually use objects?
Yeah. When do they really shine?
Right.
When are they the right tool for the job?
Exactly.
Well, one key area is when you have code that needs to be reused in multiple parts of your program or even across different projects.
This is about efficiency.
Efficiency, exactly.
Not being redundant.
Avoiding redundancy, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's say you're building a program that interacts with a database. You might need to connect to the database, retrieve data update records, close the connection.
Right.
All those actions can be bundled into an object.
So you would have this like database object.
Yeah, a database object.
That handles all of those things.
Exactly. And then whenever you need to work with the database,
right,
you just use that object.
You don't have to rewrite all that code.
You don't have to rewrite the code every single time.
That's great. And I would imagine that also makes it easier to maintain the code.
Absolutely. Maintainability is another huge benefit.
Okay.
Because if you need to change how you connect to the database,
right,
you only need to change it in one place.
Instead of like 100 different places in your code.
Exactly. It makes your code more modular and easier to understand.
Like breaking down a complex machine into smaller components.
That's a great analogy.
Each component has its own job.
Right. Each one has a specific function.
And it all works together.
And they all work together beautifully.
Objects bring that same kind of modularity to software development.
Exactly. And PowerBasic really excels at this.
Okay.
It gives you the flexibility to use objects where they make sense.
Right.
But it also allows you to use traditional programming techniques.
So you can kind of mix and match.
You can mix and match. You can use the best tool for the job.
That's great.
It's all about finding the most elegant and efficient solution.
All right, so we've talked about code reuse. We've talked about maintainability. What about planning for future development?
Yeah, that's another area where objects can be really helpful.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not until you've already written some code that you see the potential for using objects.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience.
Yeah.
Like you're going through your code and you realize
You see the same piece of code repeated over and over.
yeah, like, oh, I've done this 3 times already.
Exactly.
Maybe I should turn this into an object.
And that's a great insight.
Yeah.
It means you're starting to think about code reuse
Right.
and how to structure your programs more effectively.
It's like you're leveling up as a programmer.
You're becoming more experienced and more sophisticated.
And sometimes like a collaborative process too, right?
Absolutely.
Like one team might identify some reusable code
Right.
and then turn that into an object that other teams can use.
That's a great example of how objects can facilitate collaboration.
Yeah.
It's about building a library of reusable components.
And then anyone on the team can just grab that object.
Exactly. It streamlines development
Yeah.
and it reduces the chances of different teams reinventing the wheel.
Right. It's like, why write the same code 10 times when you can write it once?
Exactly. It's all about efficiency.
Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff now. Let's talk about the concerns.
Okay, what concerns do you have?
One of the concerns that I've heard is that using objects can make your program slower.
That's a common misconception.
Really?
Yeah, some people think that objects are inherently slow or bloated,
Okay.
but that's not necessarily true,
Okay.
especially not with PowerBasic.
Okay.
PowerBasic has taken great care to optimize its object usage.
So I don't have to sacrifice performance
No, you don't have to sacrifice performance.
for all these benefits.
You get the best of both worlds.
Okay.
You get the power of objects
Right.
without sacrificing speed or efficiency.
That's great. Now, you mentioned earlier something about interfaces.
Yes, interface.
We talked about them as being like contracts.
Right, a contract that defines how objects interact.
Right. But I'm still a little fuzzy on how they make our code more efficient.
Well, think about it this way. Interfaces promote loose coupling
Loose coupling.
between different parts of your program.
Okay.
This means that one part of your program can interact with another part
Right.
without needing to know the specific details of how that other part is implemented.
So it's like having a universal remote
Yes, a universal remote.
that can control any TV.
Exactly, as long as the TV has the standard buttons.
Power volume channel
Exactly. Interfaces provide that same kind of universality
in software.
in software development.
Okay.
They define a standard way for objects to interact.
So I could have a program that uses a file handling object.
Right.
And later, I could decide to swap that object out
Yes.
for a different one that maybe uses a different file format.
Exactly.
As long as the new object implements the same interface,
Right.
the rest of my program doesn't need to change.
Exactly. That's the power of interfaces.
Okay.
They create a layer of abstraction
Right.
that allows you to modify or swap out components
Without breaking everything.
without breaking everything.
That's fantastic.
It's like changing the engine in your car.
Okay.
As long as the new engine connects to the same transmission and controls,
Right.
the car can still drive.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you've got this flexibility.
Yes.
You've got this modularity.
Right.
It sounds like PowerBasic has really thought this through.
They've done a great job of providing a comprehensive and practical approach.
Now, one more question before we move on to our last part.
Okay.
Memory management.
Yes.
That's always kind of scared me.
I understand.
You know, all these objects floating around,
Right.
potentially using up lots of memory.
Yeah, memory leaks, crashes.
Yeah, how does PowerBasic handle that?
PowerBasic handles memory management very efficiently.
Okay.
It uses a technique called automatic garbage collection.
Automatic garbage collection.
Yes.
What is that?
It basically means that PowerBasic keeps track of which objects are no longer being used.
Okay.
And it automatically frees up the memory they were occupying.
So I don't have to worry about it.
You don't have to worry about it. PowerBasic takes care of it for you.
It's like having a self-cleaning oven.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A great analogy.
That's awesome.
It prevents memory leaks,
Right.
which can slow down your program and even cause it to crash.
And in some languages, you do have to worry about this.
Yes, in some languages, you have to manually allocate and deallocate memory for every object.
Oh, wow.
It's a very tedious and error-prone process.
I can imagine.
But with PowerBasic,
Yeah.
you can just focus on the logic of your program and let the language handle the memory management behind the scenes.
That's fantastic.
It's one of the things that makes PowerBasic so powerful and so easy to use.
Like you were saying earlier about that balance
Exactly. It's all about balance.
between power and efficiency.
Power, efficiency, and ease of use.
All right. Well, this has been really helpful.
I'm glad to hear that.
I think we've got a pretty good grasp now on the concept of objects and classes.
I think so too.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
I think so too.
We've gone from those basic definitions of objects and classes
Right.
all the way to, you know, some really practical considerations.
We've talked about memory management.
Right.
Code reuse, maintainability.
And this idea of interfaces.
Yes.
Interfaces are key.
Right, creating those modular and flexible programs.
Exactly.
And we've seen how PowerBasic makes all of this, surprisingly accessible.
It does. It takes a very pragmatic approach.
Okay.
It's not about being overly academic.
Right.
It's about getting things done.
So for our listeners out there who are maybe just starting out with PowerBasic,
Yeah.
or even for those who've been using it for a while but haven't really explored this idea of objects and classes,
Right.
what would you say is like the key takeaway from our deep dive today?
I would say the key takeaway is don't be afraid of objects.
Okay.
They're not as complicated as they might seem.
Right.
And PowerBasic makes them very easy to use.
Okay.
So dive in, experiment, explore.
Yeah, you don't have to become an object-oriented programming guru overnight.
No, you can learn gradually.
Right.
Start with small examples.
And build from there.
Exactly. And PowerBasic provides a lot of resources to help you along the way.
Okay, well, that's great advice.
I hope so.
And for those who do want to see a more concrete example
Yes.
of a PowerBasic class in action,
Right.
we'll be sure to include a link in the show notes
Absolutely.
to that simple example that was mentioned in one of the videos.
It's a great starting point.
Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive here.
I think so too.
This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has. I've enjoyed it.
Me too. I've learned a lot.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us and happy coding.